the later history of chivalry down to Cervantes. The influence exercised by Arthurian romance throughout the 13th, 14th, and 15th centuries is attested by hundreds of texts. It was an influence that spread over the same area as that of the troubadours, that is to say, over the whole of Europe. The German Minnesänger were nurtured on Catharist legends. And for that matter, all they did was to adapt the tales of Christian de Troyes from the French. The romance of Tristan was translated into every language of the West. Malory's prose version and the Morte d'Arthur dates from the end of the 15th century. Dante looked on the epic and romantic style of northern France as a model for all narrative prose. And Brunetto Latini included in his rhetoric a portrait of the ideal woman who had been extracted from Tristan. Countless imitations were produced as far afield as Norway, Russia, Hungary, and the Hispanic lands. And the most instructive examples of these in the 15th and 16th centuries are the tales of Amadis in Portuguese and Spanish, and finally in French. It is remarkable, but doubtless not surprising, that the authors of some of these imitations were brought to rediscover the original meaning of the mystical legends, although, owing either to caution or to lack of penetration, they only made use of a thoroughly Catholic mythology, something, as we have seen, that could hardly be in harmony with the original intention. In 1554, there was published in Spain a book by Hieronimo de Semperer, entitled flamboyantly, quote, Libro de Cavalleria Celestial del Palle de la Rosa Fragrante. In this, Christ is given the guise of the Lion Knight, Satan of the Serpent Knight, John the Baptist of the Desert Knight, and the apostles are turned into the 12 Knights of the Round Table. Manichaeistic esotericism, ever latent in Arthurian romance, reappears as a filigree within such symbols. Cervantes Cervantes does not name the numerous romances of heavenly chivalry, which were being found thrilling in his day. I have already mentioned the influence of this literature on St. Teresa and on the Spanish mystics in general. In Don Quixote, he is concerned merely to discredit romances of secular adventure. This neglect on his part remains puzzling. It tells in favor of the theory that he was aware of the true meaning of the courtly literature.
Are those sheets washed?
No.
Okay. I just took them out because I put some stuff in.
Okay. This neglect on his part remains puzzling. It tells in favor of the theory that he was aware of the true meaning of courtly literature and mocked his contemporaries with a sense of desperation for clinging to an illusion of which they had lost the key. On this theory, the character Don Quixote was ridiculous only because he wished to undergo an ascesis, for which he had not received initiation, and to follow a way of life for which the times were altogether out of joint. The Roman Church had triumphed. The best thing was to be on the winning side, together with the decent and realistic Sancho Panza. Romeo and Juliet, and then Milton. Yet Rome had not triumphed everywhere. In one island her power was still disputed. The island home of the last of the bards. In Cornwall and in Scotland, the traditions of the bards were still alive when James Macpherson published in 1765 his so-called Works of Ossian. Although Morven and Selma, it has been established, are names Macpherson himself invented, Ossianic ballads really did exist in Scotland in the 18th century. In Ireland, they survive to this day. I must forgo touching upon the problem of the extent to which English literature, both popular and learned, is connected with the background of Celtic legend, but it is significant to find at the end of the 17th century a sound scholar such as Robert Kirk, the theologian and humanist, writing a treatise on sprites which bears no trace of either skepticism or irony. We know almost nothing about Shakespeare, but he has left us A Midsummer Night's Dream. It has been alleged that he was a Roman Catholic, but Romeo and Juliet is the one courtly tragedy, as well as the most magnificent resuscitation of the myth that the world was to be given till Wagner wrote and composed his Tristan. So long as the life and even the identity of Shakespeare remains matters of speculation, it is futile to inquire whether or not he was privy to the secret traditions of the troubadours. But it may be noted that Verona was a main center of Catharism in Italy. According to the monk, Rainieri Saccone, for 17 years a heretic, Verona contained nearly 500 perfect, not to mention the far more numerous believers. It is quite likely that the legends of those days preserved some memory of the violent struggles between Patarines and Orthodox that the city had been the scene of. In the margin of the religious disputes of the 16th century, which caused the ancient heresies to be wrapped in an ever greater darkness, the tragedy of the Veronese lovers tears aside the veil for an instant and leaves in our eyes the negative record of a flash. Quote, the black sun of melancholy, end of quote. Sprung up out of the depths of a spirit avid of transfiguring torments, out of the abysmal night in which the lightning flash of love plays now and then on features motionless and fascinating, that our own self of horror and divinity to which the most splendid poems of Europe are addressed, resurrected all of a sudden in its full stature as though stunned by its provocative youth and drunk with rhetoric. On the threshold of the Mantuan tomb, here once again the myth stands forth in the glow of a torch which is being held aloft by Romeo. Juliet rests, put to sleep by the potion. The son of Montague enters and he speaks. Quote, how oft when men are at the point of death have they become merry, which their keepers call a lightning before death. Oh, how may I call this a lightning? Oh, my love, my wife, death that hath sucked the honey of thy breath, hath had no power yet upon thy beauty. Thou art not conquered, beauty's ensign yet is crimson in thy lips and in thy cheeks, and death's pale flags not advanced there. Ah, dear Juliet, why art thou yet so fair? I will believe. Shall I believe that unsubstantial death is amorous, and that the lean, abhorred monster keeps thee here in dark to be his paramour? For fear of that, I still will stay with thee, and never from this palace of dim night depart again. Here will I remain with worms that are thy chambermaids. Oh, here will I set up my everlasting rest, and shake the yoke of inauspicious stars from this world-wearied flesh. Eyes, look your last. Arms, take your last embrace. And lips, oh, you, the doors of breath, seal with a righteous kiss a dateless bargain to engrossing death. Come, bitter conduct, come, unsavory guide, thou desperate pilot, now at once run on the dashing rocks, thy seasick, weary bark. Here's to my love. Parentheses, drinks, end of parentheses. O true apothecary, thy drugs are quick. Thus, with a kiss, I die. End of quote. Death's consolamentum has sealed the one kind of marriage that Eros was ever able to wish for. Once more there comes a profane dawn, and once more the world goes on again, restored to his strict reign. The prince declares, quote, a glooming peace this morning with it brings. Go hence to have more talk of these sad things, end of quote. There is no doubt that Milton, although a Puritan, underwent the influence of Kabbalistic doctrines, and anything less, quote, spiritualizing it is impossible to imagine. But does not the revolt of the Puritans against the monarchy and the bishops who had turned worldly remind us of the rebellion of the pure against feudalism and the clergy? Two poems that Milton wrote in youth, L'Allegro and Il Penseroso, describe the antagonism of light and darkness, and the necessary choice which at that time he had not yet made. Indeed, he never did choose, or at least chose with such reservations as to leave it impossible to determine more closely than he wished in which direction. Even before embracing the cause of the Puritans, Milton, searching for an epic theme, had sometimes turned over in his mind the Celtic legend of Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table. In Il Penseroso, after he has hailed black melancholy, he turns to the sad virgin and bids her the soul of Orpheus to sing, or else to call up him that left half told the stories of Canis's husband, quote, that owned the virtuous ring and glass, end of quote, and also great bards who, quote, in sage and solemn tunes have sung, of tourneys and of trophies hung, of forests and enchantments drear, where more is meant than meets the ear. Milton, when preparing his history of Britain, studied the Arthurian chronicle and its legends. In De Doctrina Christiana, he attacked, to quote a recent French commentator, Floris de Latre, Milton, Introduction to Allegro, to Il Penseroso, and to Samson Agonists, 1937. To quote a recent French commentator, the creative power of God and also the dogmas of the Trinity and the Incarnation, and he repudiated traditional theological definitions which could not be supported from the Bible, end of quote. Even if we set aside this last feature, which after all links Milton with the Reformation, is this not the one and the same heresy that everywhere and at all times appears as the mainspring of the grand lyrical poetry of passion? As for Milton's materialism, it does not contradict a courtly doctrine of love as much as might be supposed. Between a monism, assimilating mind to matter, or vice versa, and a dualism which condemns matter in the name of mind, there's a gap which the history of Gnostic and Manichaean sects shows to be not unbridgeable. Especially on the ethical plane, idealism and materialism have important presuppositions, Idealism and materialism have important presuppositions in common. Extreme licentiousness sometimes goes hand in hand with an extreme and fanatical chastity. And Milton's negation of death leads him into inferences similar to those expressed by the Cathars. Like them, Milton thinks that a good will issues from intellectual principles and that a good will can purge us of evil desires, of sensual leanings, the major sin. And Flood, his master in occultism, taught that light is the divine substance. Flood. It remains that Milton's theories are more rational and are open to a more practical social application than those of the heretics of southern France. He looks on marriage, for example, as a remedy for incontinence. Hence, these theories did not foster such excessive confusions of the carnal with the spiritual, as had previously not failed to occur among neo-Manichaean sects. L'Astre, or From the Mystical to the Psychological. The history of what happened to the myth and the romance in the 17th century can, alas, be summed up in a sentence. Its mystical element was degraded into pure psychology. The romance was given over to an excessively refined literature. Honor de Urfe, La Calprenède, Gomberville, and Georges de Scuderi, together with his sister Madeleine, had none of them the remotest notion of the esoteric meaning of the chivalry of legend. The symbolical nature of the subjects that they dealt with afresh merely induced them to write interminable novels à clef. Polexandre is Louis XIII. Cyrus is the Great Condé. Diane is Maria of Medicis, and so on. The incidents remain the annoyances that love meets with, but the obstacle to the satisfaction of love was no longer the secret and metaphysical wish for death of Tristan. It became that fad of the ruling class, a point of honor. It is the heroine who is the more cunning in the invention of excuses for parting. She delights too in terrifying her chivalrous suitor, and in Gomberville's novel, Polexandre roams like one possessed over the 5 continents to make amends for whatever may have been the cause of a single angry glance from his mistress. In the end, he is still uncertain whether this queen of the unattainable island is not going to have him beheaded. But as a rule, the tales finish up with a wedding. Foreseen on the first page, the wedding is delayed till the 10,000th. The wedding is delayed till the 10,000th. The wedding is delayed till the 10,000th. 10,000th. When the author is a star performer in his line, the happy ending was first introduced in the allegorical novel of the 17th century. The genuine courtly romance culminated in death. It dissolved into an elevation outside the world. Now there was a general desire that everything should be tidied up. Society had to be in the right, and hence the endings of novels became a return to something essentially alien to romance. Happiness. I'm going to reread that. Seems like I'm making a point there. Thousand. It's a tough word to say. But as a rule, the tales finish up with a wedding. Foreseen on the first page, the wedding is delayed till the 10,000th, when the author is a star performer in his line. The happy ending was first introduced in the allegorical novel of the 17th century. The genuine courtly romance culminated in death. It dissolved into an elevation outside the world. Now there was a general desire that everything should be tidied up. Society had to be in the right, and hence the endings of novels became a return to something essentially alien to romance: happiness. In L'Astre, the great tragic themes of the myth reappear as no more than melancholy echoes. No doubt there are the 12 laws of love, ingeniously contrived partings, a eulogy of chastity, and even challenges to a death of release. But the stark and elemental interactions of Tristan have dwindled into mere coquetting, and the struggle between night and day has become but the play of twilight. No longer does the drawn sword lie between the two lovers. Instead, Celadon places there a gilt globe, tied with his shepherdess's favor. And here's something that sums up all the rest. In the 5th and final volume, the despairing Celadon summons death, and Astre, on her side, also feels that there is only one way out. Together they go to the Fountain of Truth, which is guarded by lions and unicorns, and ask for an end to be put to their ills. According to the oracle, the spell put upon the fountain will only be broken at the death of the most constant lover and of the most constant mistress. Incidentally, this recalls the way the lovers in Tristan seek forgiveness on the score that the effects of the love potion have been beyond their control. Celadon takes his courage in both hands and advances, but thereupon, mirabile dictu, the lions and unicorns set to devouring one another. The sky grows dark, thunder roars, and the genie of love appears in order to make known that after all the spell is broken. Astraea and Celadon have fainted, a metaphorical death, and are carried to the dwelling of the druid Adamas, where they revive, and presently they get married. It is customary to declare the prodigious success of L'Astrée unaccountable. And yet its charms are not unequal to those of our recent French novels of fancy and enchantment. And the psychology of French writers has not ceased to delight in allegorical elegance. Witness Jean Giraudoux. La Fontaine doted on L'Astrée and declared it exquisite. Its scene is laid on the banks of the little river Lignon, north of Saint-Étienne, and Rousseau went there specially from Lyons in order to seek out the shade of Diane and Sylvandre. It is true that the two characters were entirely unknown to the landlady at his inn. She told him that the neighborhood possessed excellent blacksmiths, and that its wrought iron work was deservedly reputed. The good woman, he notes with disappointment, must have taken me for a locksmith's apprentice.